I mean, I think there's a lot of fair concerns in there with Aiyuk as well. Like, you go through, and obviously things got really ugly in San Fran this year following the Aiyuk injury, where the injury itself being its own problem, but Aiyuk also distanced himself from the team, wanted nothing to do with them after having very recently signed a 4-year, $120 million deal to stay in San Francisco. It feels like, I don't know what San Fran's part of that, of doing their fair portion was, but we also saw like stuff on social media. He's like driving at 100 miles an hour past the stadium and not wanting to be there and trying to send a message, quite frankly, I just don't understand. But this is also then part of the problem, is like, I'm also struggled to say no. Because I do turn around, and we know that Andrew Berry has had a high interest in Brandon Aiyuk, right? Even going back to when he was available, it was a battle between us in like Pittsburgh, and he basically said, no, I don't want to go to either of those teams. Okay, so there's already a failure short there. But Berry's interested in him, and similarly to Jerry Jeudy, when he identifies a guy that he likes, he can latch onto the guy that he likes and be willing to go out and try to acquire that guy. And I'll give Berry his credit where it's due. He hasn't been able to identify a receiver in the draft to save his life, but he's worked some pretty good deals to get wide receivers here. Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, I know people don't like the contract that was handed to him, but certainly the trade was more than well worth it. You turn around, and it's sort of the biggest problem I have outside of those things is, okay, well, money's a concern. He's owed $15 million going into next season. You have an out after that, but if not, it's $41 million if you keep that same contract in place. Not to mention you're taking on dead cap from, basically cutting him from that contract, having to re-sign him. How much is San Fran willing to eat of that? There's all these things. I try not to worry myself about the money, though. If Andrew Berry can make it work, he's going to make it work. He'll kick the can down the road. He'll add on some void years. We'll be dealing with this mess probably 8 years from now. But if Aiyuk is the guy he wants to go out, money's not the biggest thing for me. I also just turned to the Browns wide receiver room, though, on the flip side of it. And it's like, how do you sit here and deny talent? Like, if you have the ability to add talent to this wide receiver room anywhere but the draft, right, because you're going to probably have to draft a top-tier wide receiver. You're probably going to have to go out there and draft some offensive linemen, and maybe 2 offensive linemen, maybe 2 receivers, maybe more than 2 linemen. Who knows? Like, you're going to have to address this thing. There's several parts of this offense you need to fix. I just feel like when I turn and look and I go, okay, well, there might be some, attitude problems with Aiyuk. There might be injury concerns. Well, what you can't argue is the fact that he's a damn good wide receiver. Like, he is talented when you put the ball into his hands. You also can't sit there and just say that, that's not a guy the Browns need. No, the Browns need talent. Like, somebody, whoever's commanding this locker room needs to find a way to deal with the personalities, and that is a problem that is going to be of their own accord that they have to figure out. But I do need talent on this team. And quite frankly, wide receivers are going to come with an attitude problem. Right? There are very few receivers in this league where you just turn around and go, well, that guy's just the most soft-spoken, has no attitude, has no ego to him. Like, hey, that's what you get in wide receivers. Right? Those are the type of guys that are in the position. That DBs tend to be the same way. There are guys who are having to perform at the highest level, like DBs especially. You have one of the hardest jobs in the sport. Probably behind a quarterback. I would probably look to your defensive backs and be like, oh, especially corners. You have to match the movement of wide receivers. Those are guys who have to have a lot of confidence to play their position. Like, a ridiculous amount of confidence to play their position and play it well. Typically, you just don't get the soft-spoken guys. I need that type of talent on my offense. I say if you can do it, you just do it. You figure it out. I mean, Jerry Jeudy's got an attitude problem of his own, and that was displayed this year in Cleveland. Okay, like, I'm going to have to find a way to deal with those things. I need a coach who can quiet those things. And whoever you're hiring, if you're hiring that leader of men, you should be able to quiet those things. Like, as much as there was the controversy between Shanahan and Aiyuk and the 49ers and Aiyuk, it also wasn't like a major storyline this year. There were points in times where it took the media, for a day or a few hours. But ultimately, it's like, okay, Aiyuk wants to walk away from the team after being injured. All right, well, we'll find the door for you. Enjoy that. Like, you need a change of scenery. If you're able to provide that change of scenery, it feels like that's a good thing. It comes with any wide receiver. Like, to the point I'm in on Keon Coleman, it'd have to be the right price. You'd have to get him for a really cheap steal of a deal. Like, Guy's talented. He's drafted in the second round for a reason. I get it hasn't worked in Buffalo. Clearly, a lot of the prevailing heads in Buffalo were not very fond of that pick. All right, put him in a position where he has some confidence. If I have to give up a fifth-round pick to go get him, if I'm getting a second-round talent, somebody that could legitimately succeed in this league, for a fifth-round pick, those are the type of moves that the Browns have to make. They have to be willing to add talent, and we can't just rely on this thing to solely be, well, you got to do it through the draft. It's unrealistic. That's not going to happen. Welcome to a repeat of this year. You might draft a couple of nice guys on the offensive end. It's not going to switch around your entire offense. You got to do more than that. All right, if you can get me a budget guy, great. If not, if you can get me Aiyuk, great. We're right back where we were, during the Amari Cooper situation. Go get me a couple of receivers. We're 2 years back in the past. Do you want Brandon Aiyuk? I'll ask you to that. Is that a target? Should it be a target for the Browns? That's a conversation that needs to be had, right? If he doesn't want to be here, if he doesn't want to play here, I agree with you. You can't bring that guy in. But just because he turned you down a year ago, or 2 years ago, that doesn't necessarily mean quarterback situation's changing. Not that they have a quarterback situation figured out. Maybe that's what leads Aiyuk to be in the exact same position in sort of feeling that he's in right now as well. But at the same time, okay, well, if he sees a lot of promise in Shedeur, sees something he likes there, maybe the Browns bring in a veteran quarterback he would prefer to play with. I think these are all the type of things that if you're Aiyuk, you turn around and go, maybe it is worth it, right? You turn around him wanting to play for the Steelers, you can bring in your questions, but it was Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. It did turn into Aaron Rodgers. They had quarterbacks of at least value there that I think would have been interesting for him. But ultimately, really nothing materialized with the Steelers either, and he ended up back in San Fran. Now San Fran doesn't want it. There are certainly concerns that go into it. It's going to come down whether or not, Andrew Berry feels like he can mitigate those. He felt like he can mitigate them, with Jerry Jeudy. Not that Jerry, declined the opportunity to want to play here, but there were struggles in Denver with Jerry. The attitude problem definitely became something, not wanting to play there, taking shots at, media members, going back and forth. Barry felt like he could mitigate those. I don't think it's out of the realm to think that you think he could do it again with, another Brandon Aiyuk type of situation. But you could argue whether or not, the Jerry Jeudy conversation has really been mitigated. It hasn't boiled over. It also wasn't great this year. All right. I can't get past today. I know that we went pretty hard at Nick on Friday and had our little back and forth based on some of the things Nick was saying about the head coaching search. Now it just feels like there's, I don't know, maybe I'm just looking for something to be bothered by. But there was something else today following, some of the news that broke this week. I just didn't sit right. The conversation, the type of conversation that was being had around the Browns head coaching search. Let's go ahead and take a listen to Afternoon Drive today.
Jonathan Jones tweeted out today of CBS Sports, this could delay being able to name a head coach.
For sure it could.
That's just, it's already a wonky search. And with the way it's gone, it feels even wonkier. And maybe that's how a guy like Grant Udinski rises from, and maybe this was a year where you had a Vrabel and a Ben Johnson and a this, that, and the other. But don't we kind of have it now? We had Harbaugh. I think McDermott becomes somebody of interest to a lot of teams.
Yeah, should be an interest for us.
So we're just in a really weird space where I'm trying not to overreact because I don't think it's appropriate yet. But I can't tell you I'm not concerned about where this thing's going.
Well, with McDaniel out, I don't know that there's a head coach outside of McDermott now that they could name that would leave you satisfied. And really, to some degree, myself included in that as well.
We're settling from here.
That's the part I don't understand, especially right at the end. What part of this is a settling for the Cleveland Browns? Truthfully, you go through and look at the candidates they brought in, guys. 5 of the 6 candidates still sit there and remain. Those are the guys with the table wide open. Sure, you didn't get John Harbaugh. Maybe that was something you would have liked. But the 5 of the 6 guys you decided you wanted to give second interviews to are still here. And I never got the feeling, that McDaniel was supposed to be the top candidate. So him being exited from the race, there's a point of it of just going through and looking and going, okay, well, clearly if Mike didn't, he was willing to turn down the Browns head coaching job to go be an offensive coordinator. There was something there. And it might not have been a disdain for the Browns. It might not have been not feeling like he was a top candidate. But very clearly, it was not a job that he legitimately really, really wanted. Right? His top option was not, I want to be the head coach for the Cleveland Browns. Okay, well, at some point when you go through and you look at the options available to you, if that's Someone who didn't necessarily want to be here, was willing to rule out the Browns. Clearly, it sounded like his agent was willing to rule out the Browns, and they were the only team that was announced that they canceled their interview, even though he canceled his interview with everybody in this coming week because he was taking another job. Didn't really sound like a job he was wanting to take. Didn't seem like one he was real high up on the list for, both from the Browns' perspective and his own. Okay, then I didn't really want that guy here to begin with. And I don't know how bad that guy wanted to be here to begin with. I just don't think that's a losing sort of side of this. It's like you look at the other guys, where does the settle come in? Okay, so you weren't able to get Harbaugh, which is everybody's top option. You weren't able to get McDaniel, which probably wasn't even your other top option. All the other candidates are still sitting there. Like I tell you, I don't want to settle. I don't want to go for second, third, fourth best. If Harbaugh was your top option, like, yeah, welcome to the rest of the league. Everybody wanted him. Everybody's down their top candidate. But it's also talking about this coaching search like, oh, there's not a Vrabel, there's not a Ben Johnson. Okay, well, go look at last year. The other coaches who got hired, outside of like Pete Carroll, Liam Cohen did a pretty damn good job in Jacksonville. I would say Kellen Moore actually did a pretty damn good job with New Orleans this year and taking a step up. I would say that Brian Schottenheimer didn't do too shabby of a job with the Dallas Cowboys. Like, it's not to say that you sit there and don't have any other good candidates. That is the irritating part about this search. Like, if you just want to win the top name contest of the top guy out there, okay, well, we can play that game. Like, I don't know that we entered a head coaching search this year to even enter into that conversation of thinking that, well, you're getting ready your coach because you want John Harbaugh. You didn't know John Harbaugh was going to be fired when you fired Kevin Stefanski. That probably wasn't even a name really in the conversation for you when you talked about, do we roll through with Kevin or do we go to one of these new guys? Right? Do we go to somebody else to lead this team? I think that was much more an internal conversation of, well, we really don't think we're going to go with Kevin anymore. Some of these other options either are just going to have to work, or maybe there's some names that we really like that could supplement for Kevin. But you sit there. Like the names are on the board this year, are the names on the board. I've pointed to the candidates, and I'll point to them again. Outside of John Harbaugh, maybe a Sean McDermott, there was never going to be, like, the sexy name of this candidacy. There was never going to be a Vrabel and a Ben Johnson, who, by the way, first-year head coach who just had high expectations. But, like, those names were never going to be available, yet 10 teams still fired their head coach this year. It's just an assumption that because you don't nail the big names on it, I think a lot of people take into account the fact that, well, there's probably not a good head coach then. If not everybody is dying to have these guys and they're at top of everybody's list, then that's not a good hire, and now the Browns are settling because they didn't get one of those guys. There's still great head coaches that are found through the back ends of searches all the time. Right? You point to a Mike Tomlin, you point to a John Harbaugh, even a Sean McVay was not like the premier name for the Rams that everybody was going out and interviewing. Kevin Stefanski, when he was brought here, same exact scenario. Like, just because a candidate is not the top tier, best possible, everybody wants that type of candidate, does not make it a bad candidate either. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be a guy in there for the room that can just lead this group and lead this team to be successful. Again, coaches come out of the woodworks. And at this point, if you're sitting there and going, oh, well, the Browns really messed this thing up, then, guys, they probably messed it up by firing Kevin Stefanski. Because these are the names that were available to you. And there weren't too many names sitting in this head coaching candidacy that are gone off the board outside of Harbaugh, where I'm like, man, you would have just absolutely died to have that guy. Like, I'm sure Jeff Hafley's fine. He was not a name that a lot of people mentioned in Cleveland. Certainly was not one of the top names that people were dying for. The same goes for, Robert Salah. Like, there weren't a ton of names, and the other hired head coach was the guy that you fired. I just don't see, the kind of back and forth of, okay, well, if it's a bad head coaching search, then it's a bad head coaching search. But right now, this is not a Browns mess this thing up, or the Browns are settling. The top options are still the top options. Your top available guys that you want are still the top available guys that you want. Like, I understand that, a afternoon drive wanted Mike McDaniel. There's not an argument against it. That was their top guy. That's who they identified as, out of the guys who made it to the second round of interviews, they wanted the most. Okay. Those are the guys that you identified you wanted. I get he's not here anymore. Like, that is a little bit of a, I don't want to say demoralizing, because I don't think anybody's demoralized by it, but you look around the room and don't feel as good about anybody. I understand where that's feeling of like, well, now it feels like the Browns are settling for less than candidates, because you feel that way. But in terms of actually, taking the step out and looking at this through the Browns' lens, I don't think there's any settling happening. There just can't be a single way we're looking at this and saying the word settling or the Browns are messing up the head coaching search or anything of those likes. If they're going to mess up the head coaching search, it's going to be by the guy they hire. Right? They're just going to have picked the wrong guy. It's not going to be that they identified 5 full candidates, all who absolutely stink and couldn't have done any job here. Again, if there were 0 candidates on the market, 0 candidates of interest, I don't think that you're watching 10 teams move on. Right? You're not just going through, if it's that bad, why did everybody make a decision to fire their head coach? They would have felt like there was nobody there to replace him. And don't think for a second organizations aren't just weighing the option of, this guy might be fired in the near coming future, but are we better off just sticking it out with him, especially when you're in a Sean McDermott situation, a John Harbaugh situation, a Mike Tomlin situation, all of these, and I get Tomlin wasn't fired. But you go through and look at those, you're going to make the decision of, do I just stick it out and give this guy another year if there's not a great head coaching candidate that we think is going to be available that we want to look at? Yeah, you do. But the Browns went through and identified several of them. I would imagine the Browns, before they made the decision to fire Kevin Stefanski, I don't think that was a on-the-whim type of decision where they woke up on Monday morning and went, yeah, Kevin's gone. We don't think he's going to do it here anymore. I would imagine that was a weeks-long process, conversations had in the front office of, do we really think we can move forward with Kevin, or does Kevin have to be gone? And that decision was probably made weeks ago, if I had to take a guess. Browns won't tell you that. They'll say that, that no decision had been made. I would think they were leaning 99% for quite some weeks. You're doing, the preliminary research of trying to find guys. It's how you identify a Grant Udinski. It's how you identify a Nate Shieldhouse. It's not just by accident that you come across some of these guys. You do talking. I'm sure you make some calls, and you do your own personal, deep dive into some of these, coaching staffs and who's doing what. You make those decisions. There's just no sense. This is where part of that negativity, the ripping the fun out of the head coaching search. Okay, your top candidate's not the guy who gets hired. Doesn't mean this can't be a fun head coaching search. Doesn't mean that this isn't an exciting time and that the Browns are just messing this thing up. I get it if you don't like the candidates, but the reality is, I'm not sitting in those interviews. You're not sitting in those interviews. Nobody in this building or, most buildings in Cleveland are sitting in those interviews and can tell you the reality of whether or not there's a good head coach sitting on the market that the Browns are talking to. It is a lot more of, there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. There's conversations that have to be had. And I think I can identify a good head coach. I'm sure you think you can identify a good head coach. I'm sure the Browns think they can. It is, we just don't know. And the reality is that they're going to go through and they're going to make a decision that is going to be more well-informed than any decision and any thought that any of us have. And it's why I think that it's really important to be open-minded and very open-minded in this. It is a one-person opinion. I don't like Todd Monken. I don't want Todd Monken to be hired. I don't dislike him as a person, but I don't think he's a great fit for that coaching job. Okay, I probably need to be more open-minded on that. If that's a guy that the Browns are going to hire, I probably do need to be more open-minded. But there's just not candidates I'm willing to just go through and go, absolutely. Now, you can't bring that guy. You can't talk to that guy, and there's no way he could be the possible option. Sure, he could. Sure, yeah, I don't know what the Browns are looking to do with their head coach. It's just calling it going through and saying that, the Browns are messing this up or they're settling. I don't think that's a fair take on this at all. I think the Browns have guys, and we're just going to have to wait for part of that to play out. I go right back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. Anybody who gets hired out of this cycle should be a feeling of excitement, should be a feeling of hope. You can have your skepticism. You can think that maybe they're not the greatest head coach. It doesn't mean that you're right and that they are that bad.